Well, as we jump in, I am excited to talk about our Philippines mission trip. Our Philippines mission trip is coming spring of 2025, and I think we actually have a date finalized. We've been working through this. We're looking at May 7 through 18, and going to be a great trip. We're going to be working with a ministry called Kids International that does a phenomenal work in Manila, Philippines. And I'm just excited to be able to partner with them and go to do this phenomenal work that's happening in the Philippines. If you are interested in being a part of that, there should be a link on the screen behind me, and I would love for you to go and fill out an application. We're looking to have applications in the next week or so, and so if you're like, man, I'm thinking about it, I'm kind of on the fence, let's have a conversation, let's get an application in. We'll have deposits due the end of the month, so you can put your application in before the deposit is due, so that's even better. And love to have you partner with us on that mission trip. While I was doing some work on the mission trip this week, though, it made me think of a trip that the church took a couple years ago, 2019. We were able to take a team from Restoration to partner with a seminary in El Ejido, Papalote, Baja, Mexico. And we were able to take a team from our church, and we hosted a pastor's conference to just minister and love on pastors and their wives and their families. And such a remarkable trip to go and be able to be a part of that. My favorite part of that Mexico missions trip wasn't the conference. The conference was great. My favorite part was the guy at the seminary that we were working with. He took us around to several of the pastors' communities. So we got to go and see, Pastor Juan. We got to see his church, and we got to see his community. We got to go to Pastor Pablo, and it was fun to go and see. I love culture. I love seeing how different cultures live and what we can learn from them. And one of the things I was so surprised as we were going through all these communities is every property had a fence around it. Their property was fenced. Now, we don't always see that here, but I guess the way it works is when you're in Mexico, if you own the property and somebody else, if you don't have a fence around it, somebody else can come and actually set up shop. And it's kind of like this eminent domain thing. Like, hey, if I was here, I can actually claim ownership of the property. So when you buy a property in Mexico, before you build a house, the first thing you do is you build a fence. And you put a gate on there, because it identifies this as my property. I dictate who comes in, who goes out. In fact, oftentimes these fences, when a family was going to start building the house, they'd put more money into their fence than they would the house. Oftentimes, a lot of these starter houses were nothing more than garage doors that they had bundled together, but they put more resource into their fence because you could always upgrade the house, but the fence wasn't something you would always do. So the fence and the gate was significant. It staked your claim, identified, hey, we belong here. We determine who comes in and who goes out. It's funny how gates and doors kind of function in the same way, right? Like those two things, they work hand in hand. Doors, fences, they let people in. They keep people out. How many of you have ever had the experience where you wanted in something? You wanted to go through the door, through the gate. You wanted in, but the door was slammed in your face. Anybody ever been there? Like maybe it was a relationship. You're like, man, I really like this guy. And they're like, nope, I have no interest in you. And you're like, man, that door just slammed in my face. Maybe it was a job, and you're like, man, I finally got the job I love. And then you get fired, and you're like, man, I feel like the door just got slammed into my face. I remember many years ago, Sam and I were working at Madison House, and we'd been there a long time. We'd been there 8 years. And we kind of sensed that the Lord was preparing us for something different. We sensed our time was coming to an end, and we felt somebody else needed to come in and take the ministry to the next level. And so there was a church that I had done a lot of work with here in town, and I had a good relationship with, and they had an open position at their church. And I'm like, well, I'm probably overqualified for the position, but man, they've got an opening. I've got a desire for change, and so I applied for the job. And I'll admit, I didn't even get a phone call from them. I didn't get an interview. Like, they had no interest, and I felt very much like that proverbial, the door got slammed in my face, and I'm like, what? I was a little offended. Like, why wouldn't you have this conversation with me? Man, anybody been there? You just had that door slammed in your face, and you're like, this doesn't feel very good. I mean, that's what gates and doors do. Gates and doors, they kind of stand there to say, hey, this is who's allowed to come in. But also, gates determine who needs to stay out, right? I mean, we all have doors on our houses, right? Because we want to say, hey, no, you belong on the outside. We put locks on our doors, right? Especially when the kids are out late, we're going to lock the door. You can stay on the outside, right? Some people, they belong on the outside. In fact, when I was at Madison House, the building that Madison House is in, the old Madison School building, there are so many doors in that building, like 1 million doors. And probably the hardest part of my job was trying to keep all those doors locked. Because if one of those doors wasn't locked, man, those kids had sticky fingers, and whatever it was going to be gone. And so I felt like half my job was just going around making sure all the doors were shut. And these kids, man, they became pretty clever. They became really clever, where they would, they'd take a penny, and they would jam it in the door jamb, so the door looked like it was shut. And I'd be like, oh, great. And then as soon as I turned my back, that door's open, and those kids are taking whatever's in there. There was other times where they would take the windows, and they would take the latch of the window, and they put some tape on the bottom of it, so the window looks like it's shut, but it wasn't. And as soon as I went home for the night, they lifted up the window, and they took all sorts of stuff. Man, we lost. If you're a baseball player, like you remember, like you get a baseball glove and you get it just right. It's worn just right. I had my favorite baseball glove in a storage closet. Man, some sticky fingers took my baseball glove. You can't replace that. It's so sad. I had cell phones taken, multiple cell phones, a couple jackets. In fact, maybe it was because I didn't lock the doors, maybe because I set things down and I forgot about them, that eventually Sam was like, the only thing you're going to take to work is the clothes on your back, because I know what's going to happen. Doors, gates, they have an important function. Determine who comes in, who goes out. We started a sermon series here a couple weeks ago called I Am, where we are looking at 7 statements that Jesus makes in the Gospel of John. These I Am statements, where Jesus is saying, listen, I am God. You remember in Moses, way back with Moses, when God said to him, I am? Jesus is making these statements, and he's going to tie them to some of humanity's greatest areas of brokenness and need. And so we looked a couple weeks ago, Jesus said, I am the bread of life, which means he's the one who satisfies the deep hunger within our soul. We looked last week where Jesus says, I'm the light of the world. That as the light of the world, he has promised his presence, his protection, and his healing that will guide our life. Today we're going to be looking in John chapter 10, and Jesus actually makes 2 of these I am statements. He says, I am the good shepherd. And that's pretty awesome. We're going to look at that one next week. It shows God's heart for his sheep. But today we're going to look at the statement when Jesus says, I am the door. In fact, some of your translations will say, I am the gate. And I'll be honest, like when I looked at all these I am statements, that was a little weird, right? I mean, like the bread of life, that totally makes sense, right? The light of the world, the good shepherd, I love it. But the door? Like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? Now, I did go on a little rabbit trail this week, and if you want to get on a rabbit trail, man, the Bible, like doors is a thing in the Bible. Like in Genesis, when Adam and Eve, when they sinned and they got kicked out of the garden, do you know what happens? It actually says that when they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, that God placed a gate at the entry to the garden, and he put 2 angels with flaming swords there to bar re-entry. There's the gate, keeping people out. And Noah's Ark, you know the story of Noah's Ark, where God told Noah to build the boat, and I want you to fill it with all the animals, and I'm going to flood the earth, and your family and the animals are going to survive. Well, in that ark, there was one door. And after Noah and his family were all in the boat, and all the animals were in the boat, God himself shut the door to save their lives. In the New Testament, you look at the temple, the building of the temple. You look at our church building, and there's, again, it's kind of like Madison House. There's doors and doors and doors and doors and doors. In the temple, there was one gate into the temple. It was the only gate that you could go to get into the temple. And as you went into the courtyard, right inside the gate, there was an altar there for you to make sacrifices to God. The idea that you walk into the temple, and the one way to get to God is through sacrifice. So doors are a thing in the Bible. And so Jesus says, I am the door. Now, one of the things I've been talking about as we look at some of these statements is we have to look at the context. Because we've got to understand what Jesus is referring to when he says, I am the door. And so what happened is just before this, Jesus is having this conversation with these religious leaders, the Pharisees, right? So what happened, there's a man that was born blind. He couldn't see, and Jesus healed him. And the Pharisees are like, what do you mean you healed the guy? And so they bring the guy before him, they interrogate him, and they're like, how did you get healed? And he's like, Jesus healed me from the power of God. He's from God. And the Pharisees are like, he's not from God. He's a sinner. He's a weirdo. There's no way that Jesus healed you. And they go through this conversation, they go through this debate where the religious leaders refuse to believe that Jesus was from God. And they end up kicking the guy out of the synagogue. Nope, you can't be a part of that. And this is the response that Jesus is having, where he begins to contrast. Again, these religious leaders, these Pharisees, they're supposed to be the shepherds of the people of God. They're supposed to lead people to the knowledge and a relationship with God, lead them into abundant life. But they're not doing that. They actually kept this man away from coming to God. And so Jesus contrasts that and says, listen, I'm the good shepherd. I lead people to God. Now, this idea of shepherding, most of us in here, we don't have and have you ever been a shepherd? Like anybody actually, like nobody's ever been a shepherd. You're lying. You're so full of it. Teenagers, man. Like most of us don't have experience with shepherding. It's not like something that many of us do. But what would happen is that as a shepherd would watch his flock, they'd be out in the fields, but at night, they would take them to what's called a sheepfold. And in the sheepfold, it's nothing more than just a fenced yard, okay? Usually made of stone or clay or sometimes mud. They'd make this fenced yard, and there was one entrance into it. One entrance into it. Now, if you were in the city, it would be a large sheepfold. It'd be large enough to have 5 or 6 different flocks of sheep within the sheepfold. And what those shepherds would do is those 5 or 6 shepherds together would pool their money, and they'd hired like a guard to stand at the entryway into the sheepfold. That way they could keep robbers out, they could keep animals out. That's what the guard's job was to do. But if you were in the country, oftentimes a sheepfold, there were just these random sheepfolds that you could use throughout the country. And you'd bring your sheep in for the night, and the entryway was left open. So the shepherd actually would lay down in the entryway to know who's going in, who's going out. This was the process. He became the gate. Nothing came in or out unless he came through the shepherd. And this is what Jesus is saying in response to the religious leaders who are turning people away from God, kicking them out. He's calling them thieves. He's saying, you're not doing your job as spiritual shepherds. Because the good shepherd, he doesn't have to climb over the fence. He doesn't have to jump in through a window. No, he goes in through the door because the gatekeeper knows him. The gatekeeper knows, oh yeah, this is the shepherd. His sheep are in here. You can come in. And when the shepherd comes in, the sheep, they hear his voice. They know his voice. Sheep are dumb animals. There's a lot of fun stories that I chose not to share today because of time, but sheep are dumb animals. But sheep can hear the voice of their shepherd and recognize it. And so as the shepherd comes in and speaks, the sheep hear his voice and they recognize him. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the shepherd next week, but Jesus is telling these religious leaders, hey, here's what's going on. And the religious leaders are like, hey, like we understand the sheep and the shepherd thing, but what does this have to do with spiritual life? In fact, it says in verse 6, this figure of speech about the sheep and the shepherd, the people did not understand what he was saying. Jesus, we don't understand how this relates to spiritual things. You're talking about sheep and shepherds, whatever, dude. And here's what Jesus says in response to that. Jesus said to them, verse 7, truly I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, and the sheep do not listen to them. Verse 9, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to kill, steal, and destroy, but I have come that they would have life, they would have life abundantly. And so as we look at this idea of Jesus being the door, there are three things that this means for us if Jesus is the door. Number one, it represents to us that Jesus is the only way to God. Jesus makes this claim of exclusivity. He says, I am the door. I'm not one of the doors. I'm not an option. I'm not a door. Jesus says, I am the door. Kind of like into the ark, there was one door into the ark. Kind of like there was one gate into the temple. Jesus says, I am the one door into the family of God. Now, I recognize, like in our day and age, people don't like to hear that. People like to think, oh, there's many ways to God. We have this conversation around our culture today where it's kind of like God's on the top of the mountain. And, there's lots of paths up to the top of the mountain. You take your path, I take my path. There's just lots of ways to the top of the mountain. I mean, all religions, they basically teach the same thing, right? Well, that's not what Jesus said. Jesus said that the sheepfold that represents the family of God, that represents being in relationship with God, being right with God, that represents the presence of God, Jesus says there's only one way into the sheepfold, and that's through him. And in our 21st century, we think, well, that sounds a little arrogant. Arrogant to say there's only one way to God? Well, I would counter and I'd say I think it's almost more arrogant for us to say, well, no, there's many ways to God. Because for us to say, oh, there's many ways to God, doesn't that kind of make us the author of salvation? I mean, when we say, no, there's many ways to God, we're kind of saying, well, no, I determine how people get to God, and I think your way and your way and your way and all the ways, they all lead to God. And so by claiming there's multiple ways to God, we essentially are making ourselves the author of salvation. And I'm pretty sure that Scripture says there is one author and perfecter of our faith. His name is Jesus. And this is why Jesus said, all who came before me are thieves and robbers. And who are the thieves and robbers that Jesus is talking about? The religious leaders, the Pharisees, the people that are supposed to be leading the people to God. They sound pious, they sound godly, they sound wise, they sound religious. But remember what happened with the blind man? Are they leading him to God? They weren't leading him to God. Now, the religious leaders, when you look at what their motivation was, what was their focus? Was their focus leading people into the presence of God? No, the religious leaders, their focus was all about themselves, about their power, about their influence. They weren't focused on leading people to God. They were focused on, hey, I've got a bunch of rules, and I think you need to do what I say you need to do, and if you don't, we're going to have some problems. Which is one of the things I think is so significant for us to understand when we start thinking about spiritual leaders and people that we follow after. The question is, are they pointing us to Jesus? Because Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I'm the door that leads to God. We need leaders that don't take our eyes off of God. Don't take our eyes off of Jesus. We're not pursuing popularity or success or a platform or whatever it happens to be. We need leaders who continually pointing us to Jesus. Jesus says, I am the door. And if your leader, no matter how pious they are, no matter how religious they sound, no matter how whatever they are, man, if they're not pointing us to Jesus, he says they're thieves and they're robbers. So Jesus says, I am the door, which represents he's the only way to God. But when Jesus says he's the door, this isn't just a promise of eternal life. It's also a promise of protection for our life. I mean, verse 9 says, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. Which means, like, if you understand what Jesus just said, again, we've got this picture of the sheepfold, and you've got the shepherd at the gate, at the opening. Jesus is the one there knowing what goes in and knowing what goes out. He's the guard, determining who goes in and who goes out. Now, the life of a sheep is dangerous. Thieves might come and steal your sheep. You also have wild animals who might kill and destroy. And the picture is Jesus as the door, as the gate. He lies down in the doorway between the sheep on the inside and all the danger that's on the outside. Nothing gets past him without his permission. Like, do you just think about how remarkable that is? Think about how remarkable that is. Imagine the sheepfold of your life. This is your life right here. And you got one little gate right here, and Jesus is laying down right there, and Jesus says, nothing comes through this doorway. Nothing comes through this doorway unless I give permission. Which means as followers of Jesus, our life is guarded by him. Psalms 84:11 says, no good thing will he withhold from those who walk uprightly. Which as Jesus is the guard of our life, he's not going to withhold anything that's good from us. Like, how awesome is that? Now, we also have to recognize and acknowledge that doesn't mean life is going to be easy, right? It's not going to be an easy life. I mean, it's not the biblical pattern. There are some thieves and robbers nowadays in age who say, man, if you follow Jesus, man, you'll be happy and healthy and wealthy and have no problems ever. Those are thieves and robbers. The biblical pattern is, even if you follow Jesus, man, we go through some hard stuff. You look at the disciples who followed Jesus, who gave their lives to establish the church, to spread the gospel. Those guys suffered in immense ways. See, what this means is that he guards our life. What this means is if we've surrendered to Jesus, if we allowed him to be in the doorway and the gate of our life, that in front of that gate lays this almighty, all-powerful, all-knowing God who's not going to let anything pass through unless he promises to use it for our good. He has good plans for you. Which means when we start looking at the stresses of life gets difficult, right? People hurt us and disappoint us. We deal with setbacks and tragedies. We have frustration with our spouse or with our kids. We deal with sickness. Like if we understand that Jesus is the guard of our life, none of those things come unless the shepherd has allowed them to come in. He's allowed them to come in for good, for a purpose, for a reason. In fact, when you think about like trying to get stronger, you know how your body gets stronger? It's through stress. I mean, that's what exercise is. Exercise is you stressing your body so it grows. Like I always say this, I love the idea of exercising. I love the idea of it. But man, it sure stinks to actually get out there and do it. It's terrible. It's horrible. I hadn't run in a while, and I decided I'm going to start running again. And man, it's terrible. Oh, man. My legs hurt. My lungs hurt. Everything hurts. And I'm like, I used to run so far. I can't do it anymore. It's horrible. But you know, when you do that, you put yourself through the stress, you are growing. And when I put myself through that stress, I find it has an impact on my confidence, on my strength, on my mental health. How much confidence would we gain if we realize that Jesus is guarding our lives? And if he allows something into our life that might be hard or challenging or difficult, how much confidence would we have if we knew that he was working things out for our good and for his glory? And what is it you're going through? The grief, the suffering, the sickness, the feeling of overwhelmed? Like, how great would it be to know, man, God has you. God has you. He's using this. You may not understand it, but God is growing and do something in you and through you. And you know what's great? Is, listen, he's not just any shepherd. We're going to look at this next week where he's a shepherd who actually lays down his life for the sheep. He dies for you. Which means when he says, I'm guarding your life, and you're like, well, Jesus, I don't feel like you're guarding my life. I'm suffering right now. And Jesus says, guess what? I died for you. I've proven my love for you. I've proven how much I care for you. I died for you. Could you trust me that whatever you're going through, I have a plan and a purpose? Because he's proven his love and his care for us time and time again. It's about whether or not we will trust him and trust his protection, trust his plans. Number one, Jesus is the only way to God. Number two, this is a promise of protection. And number three, this is an offer of abundant life. Verse 9, I am the door. If anyone enters by me will be saved. He will go in and out and find pasture. You see, a sheep in that day and age, they couldn't survive to just live in the sheepfold. They didn't have bales of hay or hoses to fill the water troughs. So literally every day in that sheepfold, the shepherd would come and take the sheep and take them out into the pasture lands. Take them to find water to drink, to graze, and to do those things. And they'd bring them back every night into the sheepfold for their protection. So you have the shepherd who leads the sheep safely in and out of the fold, leads them to green pastures, to still waters, leads them to safety and free. Like, I don't know about you, but I think about this idea of like coming in and out. To me, that sounds like freedom. That we have a shepherd who leads us to these different things. Hey, right now, we need to go and get some green pasture. Let's go get it, bro. Hey, we need to go get some still waters. Oh, right now, we need to go in the sheepfold. We need to find the safety. Like, how amazing is it to think that there is a shepherd who will lead us like that? In fact, he expands on that idea in verse 10. He says, a thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. But I came that they would have life, they would have life abundantly. In fact, I was thinking, this probably will connect with many of us in this room, especially if you're young. That sometimes we think, well, surrendering to Jesus doesn't sound like freedom. Like for me to surrender to Jesus and follow him, that doesn't sound like freedom and abundance. It sounds like I got to give up all my fun. I mean, I got to follow you, Jesus? I lose my ability to choose what I want to do with my body and my relationships and my career and my sexuality and my money and my time. I got to give that up, Jesus. That doesn't sound like abundant life. That sounds like a life of misery, right? But C.S. Lewis gave this analogy, and I'm stealing it from C.S. Lewis, so it's not my own brainchild. I'll confess that. I'm not that smart. C.S. Lewis says, when is a fish most free? A fish is not free when you take the fish and put it on dry land and we're like, hey, go run, fish. Go run and jump and soar through the sun and just, fish, you're on dry land. You should just go sunbathe. Like, it'll be amazing. You'll love it. You'll be free. You'll be a free fish. That makes for a great Disney movie. Makes for terrible advice. Because that would kill the fish, right? A fish is most free when the fish knows who he is. He's a fish. He is freest when he is swimming in the habitat that he was designed to swim in. Abundant life for the fish is knowing who he is. That there is a shepherd who cares for him, who loves him, who protects him, who leads him to swimming wherever he's supposed to go. See, I think abundant life is us knowing who we are. No, actually, maybe a better way to say it is abundant life is knowing whose we are. Abundant life is when we realize we are children of God. We were created by him. And I'm going to guess, if we're created by him, He probably knows how this life works best. Oh, but I'm a fish and I want to run and I want to sunbathe. That's not freedom, that's murder. That's suicide. We have a shepherd who loves us, who will lead us and guide us to abundant life. And guess what? That life is found through Jesus. Reality is we are constantly bombarded with all sorts of thieves and robbers whose goal is simply to steal, kill, and destroy. Thieves and robbers, they may sound like these religious leaders, may sound like the media, politics, our friends. Hey man, you can just pursue different relationships and they'll make you feel good. You can pursue drugs or alcohol or pornography or whatever it is. You just follow this and there's satisfaction in that. There's freedom in that. We have what you're looking for. How many of us in this room have been down that path? And those things entertain us for a while. They satisfy for a moment. But if we're going to be honest, they only create more brokenness and more emptiness. In fact, our family got to go to Yellowstone this summer. And one of the things we saw in Yellowstone is we got to see a wolf. It was awesome. It crossed the road 25, 50 yards from us. It was amazing. It's a black wolf. So I came back and I've read more about wolves in the last 2 months than I've ever read in my entire life. They're fascinating animals. And the Eskimos have a very interesting way to kill a wolf. What the Eskimos will do is they'll take a knife. They'll take a knife and they will dip it in seal fat. Dip it in seal fat, get it nice and covered in it. And then they take that knife and they plant it upside down in the snow. So just the blade of that knife is up. And a wolf comes, smells that seal fat. Smells good. Starts licking it. That's weird. I just licked in church. That's weird. Sorry about that. I don't have to show you how to do it. You know what it looks like, right? Goodness gracious. Where are we going now? What am I talking? Okay. The blade is upside down, and the wolf comes and licks it. And then all of a sudden, starts tasting some blood, and it's like, I like the taste of blood. Doesn't realize it's his own blood, but tastes that blood, and it's like, I like this. And will continue licking until literally the wolf will kill himself. See, I would say that there's many of us that we long for abundant life. We're following that scent. We're following our heart. We're following that seal fat, the scent of that relationship, the scent of wealth and power and fame and popularity, and it's exciting for a time, only to realize it's cutting our tongue and leading us more broken and more hurt. In fact, here's the summary for this passage. Jesus is the door that leads to salvation, that protects us, and literally will lead us to abundant life. Hear this verse again. I am the door. Anyone who enters by me, he will be saved. He will go in and out and find pasture. And he says, I came that they would have life, and they would have life abundant. Listen, this is the offer for you. This is the offer from God for you. This is the life that you were created for. These pasture lands, that God's goodness and grace is that you would have the assurance that even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, He is with you. That His rod and His staff, they comfort you. That He would anoint your head with oil, that your cup would overflow, that surely goodness and mercy will follow you all the days of your life. This is the other side of us walking through the door, of having Jesus as the door into life with Him. As I came to this point in the message, I'm like, hey, how do I apply this? I don't have 3 things to tell you to go and do this week. And my challenge is not to go and sell all that you have and give to the poor. My application is this. There's an old TV show called Let's Make a Deal. Anybody remember that? Let's Make a Deal? And they would have 3 doors. 3 doors. Behind one of the doors, there's a great prize. It's a new couch. It's a car. It's a trip on a safari, whatever it happens to be. And you got to pick which door you go into. And you hope you got the right one. There's some of us we've been walking through the wrong door for a long time. There's the door of a relationship. Oh, this relationship will satisfy everything that's gone wrong with me. I'm going to pursue that door. I'm going to walk through that door. Oh, there's the door of career. If I just invest myself in this career, I'll be happy and satisfied. There's the door of wealth. If I just had enough money, everything would be good. Well, here's the door that shows how capable I am, how smart I am, how independent I am. And man, if I can just be smart and independent, everybody would know how great I am. There's the door of drink and drug and all those other things that would distract us and numb us to life. There's the door of politics that, man, it's Trump or Harris that's going to solve everything that's gone wrong in our world. And there's the door of religion. If I just be good enough, if I just do enough good things. Some of us have been walking through these doors, spending our life. They don't lead to abundant life. They are thieves that come to steal, kill, and destroy. Jesus is the door that leads to life, and life abundant. In fact, I know there are some of us, we've been carrying a weight, carrying a burden. And we've come to this door that says Jesus, and we've been knocking on the door. We've been ringing the doorbell. But it's a little scary to walk through. It's a little scary to trust. And so we knock on the door, then we go tell all these other people, hey, what do you think? What do you think about this? What do you think? And Jesus is right here saying, just walk through the door and give it to me. Just give it. Just trust me. But we're on the doorway. We're like, I can't do it. I'm just knocking. I'm flirting with it. I can't give it to you. See, the door of Jesus was opened by his blood. And all we have to do is surrender. All we have to do is lean into him, to trust him. Jesus paid the way to our salvation. He paid the way for us to have abundant life. All we have to do is lean into him and trust him and depend on him. And that doorway is open to us. Let's pray.